I have heard so many terrible stories recently about theme park visits from friends, family, and even other YouTubers. So I figured I would share my personal experience with my least favorite visits to parks. Ranging from weather to park mishaps, here are my least favorite days I had riding roller coasters. I figured I'd break these up between 3 days: weather event, a park management day, and pure crowd size. So let's start pretty simple here and look at a day that tortured us with weather. Now this isn't going to be the obvious rain pick like a lot of people think. This was actually the 4th of July 2 years ago up at Six Flags New England. Now if anyone has ever visited this park, they know it isn't the best in terms of shade. Most areas are fully exposed to the sun, including 90% of the ride queues. Now normally this really isn't too much of an issue, but this day was a cool and comfortable 98 degrees and a pretty high humidity rating as well. So what? We threw on our short sleeves, brought out our refillable cups, and planned to brave the holiday. However, the park has another issue. It isn't really the lack of shade, it's actually the footpaths. Where most parks use concrete and bricks, Six Flags has had a bad habit recently of picking the cheapest material around, black asphalt. While the lines weren't too bad, just walking around the park felt like we were melting into the pavement, and even though it was that hot, it just got worse throughout the day. It even made it just harder to breathe in general. Following the short visit, the few hours in the car back were also a pain. Nothing just saps the energy out of you like extreme heat, and hopping right back in the car to drive home just feels so much longer and so much worse, even if it was only a couple hours. All I can say is that we were lucky enough that we brought plenty of sunblock, drank lots of water, and really didn't overstay our limit here, otherwise we would have been pretty exhausted the next day. Moving on to my park management day, it goes to Lake Compounce, also back in 2019. Now, my first visit to the park was simply annoying. Walking into the park, every roller coaster was closed for the first 30 minutes of the day after opening, including the iconic CCI Boulder Dash. Now that seems much more like a Six Flags move than a local park. Now over the course of the day, all the roller coasters except for Phobia, which is their newest, would open, but their boomerang would remain closed for the rest of the day after only having a few cycles. It had to be evac'd after rallying. So 2 out of 4 roller coasters would remain closed, and with the only other 2 having one train, the queue lines would become much longer. Then another one of their major attractions, an S&S Scream and Swing, would also remain closed all day. Their drop tower would be open all day, but with only one tower, again the line would be over an hour. For such a small park to be missing 3 of their major attractions, especially when other rides already have a small capacity, it really puts a drain on guests. Weekend crowds added in on top of that didn't help either. Now that being said, I did return to the park a few weeks later, and I had a much better experience. All the rides were open, but even with that, the capacity was still an issue on the weekend. But still, the rides were a bunch of fun, they got us through everything, except for Wildcat. That ride can leave, that ride is terrible. I don't care that it's old, it should leave. And finally, we have the day of pure crowds. Absolute mayhem. Six Flags Great Adventure on the weekend before Halloween. Yes, I know it's probably my fault here, but let me explain. I went to college in South Jersey, so my school would offer transportation and discounted tickets to the park. It was only about an hour and a half away. Now the only issue was, on this trip, we weren't getting to the park until 5 o'clock on a Saturday during their most popular event, Fright Fest. For those not familiar with the theme park industry around Halloween, it becomes a madhouse, with people pouring in for these haunted festivities, and this would be the busiest I've ever seen one of the busier Six Flags parks. Now Six Flags Great Adventure sits right between Philly and New York City, and it draws from 2 of the larger metropolitan areas in the country. And I grew up with this multi-hour waits all the time when I went to the park. But after waiting over an hour just to get through security and ticketing, I was pretty shocked to see the extent of the crowded park. The shortest wait for a roller coaster would be 3.5 hours for the Dark Knight, and most would range over 4 hours. And the shortest haunted house would top 2.5 hours. Now really the worst part was that due to our college's limits, their bus would be leaving at 8 p.m. So basically, after getting in at 6:15, we'd have to make our way back around 7:45, and no coaster was nearly close enough to have a short enough queue to let us ride. Now, eventually we would just settle for bumper cars, which was already a 45-minute wait, grab some Dippin' Dots, and just head back. Honestly, the visit was definitely more my fault than anything else. I should have known just how bad the crowd would be, and with so little time, I really should have just skipped the trip. That being said, the park was definitely nearing capacity, with one of the larger parking lots getting filled, so maybe they should have cut some people off, but honestly, who knows. The following years, I would only take our yearly spring trip to Hershey Park, which was always a bit cold, but always a great day, because no one ever goes to that park in the spring for some reason. So that was a lot of complaining, but I figured I'd tell some stories this week, and even though rough days happen, these have never deterred me from future visits. That being said, they have influenced some plans. Like, I tend to avoid parks at the end of October, just because I know how crazy they get. And if you do go, make sure you get there first thing in the morning. They tend to fill up after around 2 o'clock. So what about you guys? What are your worst or favorite park visits? And was it more of a mental mistake that you went, or did the park just have it in for you that day? Let me know below. Until next week, that's all from the shores of Island Coasters.